y'all, welcome to my kitchen. For my first cooking episode, I wanted to try my best Dylan Hollis impression, but I'm not quite sure if he gets that volume from floof powder or gay magic. So today's heritage recipe is Apfelkuchen, and I originally wanted to make it for my dad for Father's Day, but I could not find it in what remains of Grandma's recipe book. Then I discovered Mom did not use Grandma's recipe for Apfelkuchen. She used the recipe Rosa's Apple Coffee Cake from the 1990s Lutheran Brotherhood cookbook. Now, as with most of my baking, because I'm gluten intolerant, I'm going to mostly ignore the recipe. My secret to getting anything gluten-free to actually work is flax meal. So what I do is I take the liquid ingredients in the recipe. So we got these 3 cups of milk and 3/4 cup of margarine that I'm going to use as our flax liquid base. Now, when working with flax, I try to go with the ratio where you've got about 1/3 to 1/2 flax meal, and then the rest boiling water. So I got a little over a cup of flax meal. And there's no vanilla in this recipe somehow. There's also no eggs in this recipe. It's a very strange one. But this is where, if you're baking anything, it needs at least a splash of vanilla. And it mixes in nicely with the flax. So I'm going to add the water and pop her in the microwave. You want your flax meal to be nicely stirred into the water before you heat it up so that it all kind of homogenizes. And since this recipe uses yeast, I'm going to add my sugar to the flax mixture. And then once this cools down enough for yeast to be happy growing in it, I'll add the yeast to this. Alright, so our goop mixture is already nice and hot. And if this was a recipe where I was going to make muffins or something and add some dried fruit to the mixture, adding your dried fruit during your goop setting phase works really nicely for plumping those dried fruits up and making them extra tasty. But we need to wait for our goop to cool down enough to add the yeast. Thankfully, I checked first and discovered that our old yeast thermometer does not work anymore. But thankfully, I have the thermometer from my biochemistry set still. So now to tackle the dry ingredients while we're waiting for that to cool. Alright, so this recipe calls for 9 cups of flour. Gluten-free flour bags do not come with enough flour in it. And I've got 2 different gluten-free flour mixes. So I have this cup for cup, which is very cornstarch based and also has milk powder in it, which is part of the reason why I didn't add any milk in with my goop phase. I got a couple bags of the Bob's Red Mill, which is mostly rice flour. And the problem with rice flour is it adds that really characteristic grittiness that you find in pretty much everything gluten-free. But I'm still going to use the open bake first. And we'll see how far it goes. Now, a lot of people who do gluten-free baking on a regular basis will be absolutely shocked by how haphazard I am with all of my measuring. Most people who do gluten-free baking measure out each specific type of flour in their flour blend, weighed out on a gram scale. And it's just like, I do not have the patience for that. If it tastes good, it's good enough. And now the second bag. That'll do. This is one of the few things that actually matters for the measuring. is because the salt plays such an important role in the chemistry of the baking. But I'm still not going to be precise. And again, there was no actual baking powder called for in this recipe, but gluten-free foods have such a horrible time rising that I'm going to give it all the help I can get. That's a big reason why gluten-free bread loaves are so small and pitiful. They only call for cinnamon and nutmeg, but I am not going to make a spice cake without getting all my spices in there. The nutmeg's the most important one though, because that's your key pumpkin spice ingredient, is the nutmeg. That's the aroma that really hits you and you're like, oh yeah, I want that. I have to have some clothes, but I'm not gonna get carried away with it. And go with some ginger, because it goes very well with peaches, which I'm going to use instead of apples, because my sister's allergic to apples. Gotta have all of the fun food allergies in the family. Nope, needs more cinnamon. This is how I get my spice profile ready. Just give it a good mix. Give it a whiff. Still not quite right. Yeah, this one smells a little better. Our goop has reached just the right temperature of 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And according to the instructions on the yeast, I would be using 2 1/4 teaspoons to be equivalent to 1 packet. And our recipe here calls for 2 packages. So I'm just going to go with 6 teaspoons because, again, gluten-free stuff has a horrible time rising. I've never actually added yeast to the goop before. This is kind of, everything I do is an experiment, really. But, but because the goop is basically set by this point, the yeast is not really mixing in very well. Which might not necessarily be a problem. In this recipe, the yeast gets added directly to the dry ingredients and then just does its thing. It's all just gooped onto the spoon. Oh man, that's funny. Come on, little guys, get back into the hot tub. Yeah, I'm guessing this is actually gonna backfire really badly on me. Because yeast needs the water in order to react. Although it does at least have full access to full 3/4 of a cup of sugar instead of the like half a teaspoon you usually use for activating yeast. But this thing is way more clumpy than it usually is. We'll see how these yeasty boys do. No, don't let it pour out. It's very full, so it's hard to show. I can't easily angle down the camera, but you can tell that it's bubbling, so it's working. Now the flax goop is set and the yeast is prepped. I'm just gonna dump this in with our dry ingredients and throw it on the KitchenAid. Now, while it's on the KitchenAid, I'll be adding the other 6 cups of flour, and we'll see how this turns out. So, the KitchenAid really struggled with all of that flour, but the consistency feels about right, so I think I counted it right at least. So now, this is going to hang out someplace warm for about an hour, and it's the middle of summer, so I can just stick this out in the garage. I'll come back to you later. Yes, good girl. Good girl. Yes, you're joining me for a video. This is my little sister, Minnie. She is 9 years old, so be good. Good girl. Alright, so now I'm going to wash my hands before I get back to the baking. Alright, so it has been an hour, more than an hour actually, and my dough has really not risen at all, which is really not surprising with the lack of gluten. The recipe tells me to knead this and let it sit for another rising period, but if the rising period's not going to do anything, I'm gonna save myself an extra step and get this thing in the pan after I just beat the German into it once. Rosa, Rosa, Simon, Rosa, I wish I knew more of this song. So, kind of funny little story of why I have learned more German from Rammstein than from my mother. Despite the fact that all of my grandparents spoke German at home growing up. The only time I have ever seen my mother irrationally flip out on me. Irrationally flip out on me. So I was 4 years old, and I said Gesundheit to a random lady in the grocery store because she sneezed. And Mom just whipped her out. I was like, you cannot speak German in public. And then we stopped saying Dankeschön when you pass the potatoes. As a white person, that's my only real personal experience I have with the generational effects of racism. And yes, it is still racism because all of my grandparents grew up in the US. The most recent immigrant in my family was my Jewish great-grandfather, who refused to sign for his niece and nephew's visas because they turned family over to the Nazis. My grandmother on my other side lost an older brother in World War II. I think both of my grandfathers actually served in the military. But yeah, everyone spoke German at home until they started being called Nazis for it. Like, I saw a different video recently of a lady saying how the North is more racist because you have all of these neighborhoods that are consigned to one nation's type of people. But the reason why those neighborhoods existed because it was very common for people to not speak English. And it was a more common thing in the North because it's more similar in weather to Europe than the South. Apparently Louisiana must feel a lot like France because the French people took that over as very noticeably and still getting to do their thing. But specifically in Wisconsin, I wish I remember the name of it, but there's a region in Germany that starts with P. And Wisconsin apparently has weather closest to that little nugget of Germany. And that's why everyone settled down here and is like, oh, hey, we like it here. Bring the rest of the family. We should do bread things more often. It takes a lot of energy, but you don't get to punch something really good very often. Wait, was this supposed to make 2 cakes? And that would explain why I needed 9 cups of flour. But on the other hand, that kind of makes up for the lack of rising. It's supposed to be 2. This isn't going to rise a whole lot more, I don't think. I mean, it will rise some because I added the baking powder. That'll make up for the yeast not doing its work. But this definitely is not 2 9 by 13 cakes. So I think I'm going to prep my cake pan, and then we're going to give this an hour after I put it in the cake pan to see if it'll at least rise enough to take up the shape. Now, one of the things I learned from Dylan is apparently these glass baking pans have a bit of the soggy bottom problem, which was a bit of what I had when I last attempted to make Apfelkuchen, but I was using just yellow cake mix and it didn't really work. So I was thinking I would compensate for that by putting flour on the bottom, but because of how dry the dough feels, I think I'm still going to spray it down. Alright, so I'm gonna put this back in the garage, check it in another hour, and we'll see if it rises again. Welcome back. I've got the bread dough out of the garage, and it has actually risen a little bit. It's got a nice fluffiness to it, smells nice and yeasty. And I discovered a clever way of draining the peaches. So I cut a little edge on one side and a little on the other side so that the air can flow through as you tip it. And it can flow nicely out, and you don't have to press the lid into the peaches to keep the peaches inside while you're letting the liquid drain. Oh, sweet. They're nice small-sized sliced peaches, so I don't even need to cut them smaller. Life hacks for when you want something nice to eat and you're low on spoons. I should really adjust the camera for this part actually, so you can see this part of the process. So apparently this is why all of Dylan's videos have him hunched out like this, because this is the only way to get both the food and me in frame at the same time. Which is why you couldn't see most of what I was doing unless I picked it up and showed it to you. Be careful not to scratch your hand on the inside of the can while you're pulling out your peaches. Let's turn the hand so I stop scratching my hand. So now I'm wishing that I had just opened one can and arranged it, because this is actually going to be more peaches than I need, but I think I'm just going to make it extra peachy. More peaches, peaches for me. Actually, we're not going to have millions of peaches this year, because apparently it was too warm this spring and most of them didn't bloom. Down global warming. On the other hand, if you're someplace like Missouri or such, where you're typically a little too far north for your peaches, you probably could actually grow some peaches. Maybe this is going to work out just about perfect, actually. I did have one more can of peaches on reserve, but I am not going to need that one. So the recipe keeps confusing me on this next part, because it calls for 1 cup of whipping cream, but then down below it only says to pour half a cup over the cake. So is it like the one part of the recipe where it's been distributed between the 2 cakes? I'm assuming so. So we're just gonna make half a cup of cream substitute. Because both Mom and I are lactose intolerant, so there's no real milk in the house. Like, we'll take some lactate with this, but we ain't got no moo juice. Coconut milk really isn't gonna provide the same kind of pulled flavor profile. I couldn't figure out if I wanted to amend it with butterscotch syrup or maple syrup, so I'm just gonna do both. We take our cream mixture and we pour it over the cake. And I did not do this step when I did my last attempt, so we'll see how the soggy bottom problem works out right. But I did have my sugar and spice mixture already prepared from that. Sugar and spice and everything nice. Oh, weird. Apparently, it wants to have another 30-minute rising session after it's been topped. Although that might help with the moisture kind of just evening itself out. So, I'll come back in half an hour. Hello again. So, it's been half an hour, and I cleaned up some of my mess. I also found the attachment for the KitchenAid that would have made funneling in the flour as I was mixing it a lot less messy. So, let's see how this is looking now. That smells nice. And you can kind of see the way the cream has oozed down into the bread. So now, I'm gonna slap this in the oven for, it says 30 to 40 minutes, but We're in Wisconsin, and that's below sea level. So typically you need about an extra 5-ish minutes. So I'm gonna slap it in there for 44 minutes at 325. Welcome back. So the kuchen is out of the oven. It has been about an hour and 20 minutes, and it is still just soup on top. But if you can see, it's getting really dark brown on the bottom. So I don't want to bake it any further. So I'm just going to accept that this one's going to be more like peach cobbler than a kuchen. It's still definitely going to taste good, and we will check that out after this thing cools down. And now for the moment of truth. Chef Ramsay would shame me for my plating technique, but it doesn't have to look good, it just has to taste good. And that turned out really good, actually. You can see, actually, the bottom, most of the cake actually baked all the way through, and it's just a really moist layer at the top. The moist layer does not taste creamy at all. So the coconut milk did not work. And I think the peach juices really alter the consistency there too. It might actually work better with cherries. But it's good. I think I'll probably make a few tweaks to it next time. But I think this time, Dad will at least be happy with it. He didn't complain about my last one, but I could tell he was a little disappointed. I'm pretty happy with that. So, y'all take care and have a wonderful day.